Study Section 7. The Idea of Democracy. Introduction. Study Section 7. The Idea of Democracy. Introduction. This study section will expose you to the idea of democracy and how it has developed. Also, you'll be exposed to features, types, and criticism leveled against democracy as a system of government. On a final note, we will discuss reasons why democratic governance in African states has not flourished compared to other continents around the globe. Learning outcomes. When you study this section, you should be able to define and use correctly the term democracy, present the historical development of democracy, distinguish between the two types of democracy, highlight features of democracy, discuss criticism against democracy, point out reason why democratic governments have not flourished in most parts of Africa. Democracy. Democracy was coined from two Greek words, demos, people, and kratia, rule. The word democracy then literally means the rule of the people or government by the people. Abraham Lincoln, in his Gettysburg Address, defined democracy as the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Democracy, due to its features, has become the most popular form of government in the contemporary world. It is taken as the most legitimate form of government. It is the case that any country that is not practicing democracy is ostracized from the Committee of Nations. Historically, development of democracy. Historically, democracy began in ancient Greece. The Greek city-states, like Athens, were the first state in Western Europe to practice democracy. Although while it is said to be a government, that is, a government that allowed the participation of everybody, it was the free citizens of the Greek city-states that actually took part in it. Women, children, foreigners, and slaves were not regarded as citizens and were therefore not eligible to participate in government. Omorigbe, 2007, page 30 to 31. Many philosophers have supported the evolution of democracy. They include Aristotle, who developed what is called polity or constitutional government, John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, known for his idea of the general will, Edmund Burke, and Baron Montesquieu. In contemporary times, democratic governments are constituted through political parties. The political parties are made up of bodies of men who are united for promotion by their joint endeavor, the national interest, and upon some particular principle in which they all agreed. Types of democracy. There are two major types of democracy, namely direct democracy and indirect democracy. Direct democracy. The direct democracy can be traced back to ancient Greece. It is described as the archetype model. In this democracy, all the members of the political community, that is, free citizens, take part directly and actively in the decision-making process of the society on a day-to-day basis. It is also called popular democracy. Two-sided empiric schools had worked out the basic characteristics of this Athenian model of democracy. Indirect democracy. The Greek model of direct democracy cannot be practiced in modern societies, especially due to increase in population. It is now practiced through representative. The act of electing representatives to act on one's behalf in government is called indirect democracy. Due to the complexity of the evolved industrial societies, marked by the degree of social, economic, and political differentiation, coupled with rapid increase of population, it becomes necessary that citizens participate in governance through their elected representatives. Features of democracy. The features of democracy provide a good basis for understanding the concept of democracy. Rather than look for a perfect and all-encompassing definition of democracy, one can better appreciate what democracy is and whether a government is democratic or not by examining its basic features, attributes, or characteristics. The following are some of its basic features. 1. The existence and prevalence of a common will or interest guiding government endeavors. 2. The respect and treatment of citizens as rational and active beings. This factor also presupposes the freedom of the citizens in matters concerning their social and political life. 3. The consent of the ruled as the basis of the authority of the state and government. 4. Decision by the majority vote. 5. The rule or impartial application of law. 6. The acknowledgement and promotion of equal and political rights. 7. Tolerance of dissenting views. 8. Respect for minority and opposing views. These ideas and features can be merged to form the central principle of political participation of the citizens concerned. In other words, democracy is fostered if there is active participation of the citizens in the political process without unjustified discrimination. Criticism of democracy. Like any other political system or idea, the idea of democracy is not without some problems. For instance, there is the problem of tyranny of majority. It is taken that democracy is granted on a utilitarian platform, which means it is for the highest number of people. Therefore, it is tyrannical in nature and not as equal as it portrays itself. Also, democracy has been criticized on the bias of participation on the side of the minority. Thus, it may not be said to be the ideal political system it claims to be. Another problem with democracy is that it wrongly presupposes that the majority is always right, whereas that is not the case. The majority is not always right. In fact, the majority can be wrong. Following from this criticism flows another one. This is the view that democracy in its preoccupation with majority view ignores the knowledge of experts who are always a small minority in every society. For instance, the majority may be misinformed, yet their view is preferred to that of the expert minority. Problems with democracy in Africa. In spite of some of the criticism identified above, democracy is still the most preferred system of government. The African states have been pressured into making democratic reforms by the Western world in the last few decades, due to pressure at home and abroad, especially concerning the imposition of economic sanctions. Many dictators in Africa organized elections which they manipulated to remain in power. In many cases, the democratization only involved the change from military uniforms to civilian dresses. The political actors were still the same, and much did not change, especially concerning the appropriation of democratic values. Oyeshile 2011, page 57. The following are some of the factors that have retarded the growth of democracy in some African states. 1. Ethnic chauvinism and tribalism. 2. Unprecedented corruption on the part of government officials, which has led to abject poverty on the part of the citizens. The poverty, in turn, has forced the citizens to mortgage their democratic rights. 3. In most states in Africa, when seeking re-election into power, the ruling party and the incumbent government use government wealth and facilities to further their own self-interest to ensure their return to power. 4. In many states in Africa, the Interdependent Electoral Commission, which is supposed to be an unbiased arbiter, is not free from bias and is hardly independent. In most cases, the electoral body furthers the interest of the ruling party through the act of omission or commission or both. 5. Also, in many countries in Africa, the government is hijacked by the wealthy members of society, and the government in such democratic setting becomes a government of the rich, by the rich, and for the rich. The implications of this are very negative for political development and whatever pretense any democratic government may take about development. Development should be primarily about the people. Study section summary. In this study section, we discuss the idea of democracy, starting from its Greek origin, which allowed for direct democracy. We also examine the two major types of democracy, namely the direct and the indirect, and argue that due to the complexity of modern societies, indirect democracy through people's representatives is practiced in majority of states. We listed the features of democracy that makes it attractive to people and concluded by looking at some factors that have made democracy to be unattainable in many African countries. End of study section 7. Thanks for listening.